Good morning. Welcome dear students. Today I am going to explain you chapter 5 Mother's Day. This is written by Priestley. It is satirical, humorous and message-giving play. So I will explain you introduction about character sketches, summary and the value points of the chapter. So let me start. Before explanation, I am giving you introduction of the chapter Mother's Day. Let me start. Mother's Day is a play written by Priestley. It is a satirical, humorous depiction of the status of women, in particular a housewife in a family. Moreover, a housewife dedicates all her time in the service of her family, but her family takes her service for granted, never take notice of her needs. Family never acknowledge her service or thank her for all that she does for them. Not a single word of thanks is received by family members. And family members, they treat her like a servant. Everyone neglects her. This issue is prominent and relevant today. Many houses out there sulking suffer in silence. The issue the play raises is genuine. Issue can't be set by mere changes of personality of husbands, sons and daughters. In order to give wives the praise they deserve, the family needs to give them desired attention. The whole story revolves around Mrs. Pearson. Mrs. Pearson, who is an epitome of love, care and sacrifice. Priestley has titled this one act play Mother's Day. Title conveys a definite message. Husbands and children must respect wives and mothers in their families. They must not order and keep them running all the time doing one work or the other. They should not treat them like servants. Mrs. Pearson, with the help of Mrs. Fitzgerald, succeeds in setting her spoiled children and husband's right. Mother carries the day and wins over all the members of the family to her side. So Mrs. Pearson, who is a very loving, caring, devoted her time, devoted her life for the sake of her family. But in view of that, her family members don't recognize her, don't give respect. They treat her like a servant. Priestley raises certain important issue particularly related to mothers in his famous one-act play Mother's Day. Mrs. Pearson, she is a typical housewife, typical mother. She runs after her husband and children all the time. She takes their orders as she were their servant. She has to stay at home every night while they go out enjoying themselves. It is ruining her as well as her family. Important issue raised is that sons, daughters, husbands should take notice of their mothers and wives. So dear students, pay attention here. Many houses are there where mothers are treated like servants. In order to give wives the praise they deserve, the family needs to give them desired attention. Chapter portrays practical experience of mothers. Mrs. Pearson on a daily basis her kids disregard her. In her own home, she was treated as a slave. Thus she felt a lot of ignorance, embarrassment every day, not only from her daughter Doris and son Cyril, but also from her husband George Pearson, who has completely turned a blind eye from his wife. Mrs. Pearson's life turns when she meets Mrs. Fitzgerald, a fortune teller, and discusses her family members, their terrible behavior. She tells Mrs. Fitzgerald everything about her family behavior. Mrs. Fitzgerald, she was a strong, sinister personality, recommends her to exchange personalities because she had learned magic. She knew the magic so as to teach her family a good lesson. At first, Mrs. Pearson didn't agree because she was very typical type of mother. She didn't agree, but after some encouragement, she agreed to switch bodies. So, in the end, both exchanged their personalities. After that, Mrs. Fitzgerald cast a spell, switched her personality with Mrs. Pearson in a matter of seconds. Personality switch, and now Mrs. Pearson, who was calm and composed, she was a changed personality. She started smoking, drinking, and playing cards. Mrs. Fitzgerald is now sitting idle because they had exchanged their personalities. Now the scene changes. Mrs. Pearson, who is in her home, her daughter Doris Pearson entered in home. She handed her a dress, asked her to iron, and she had to go out on a date with her boyfriend Charlie Spence. Also, she even objected her mother's smoking, drinking. When she asked her, Mrs. Pearson replied very harshly, very rudely, and advised her to do her work herself. Further, she made fun of her boyfriend. Afterwards, Doris, she felt miserable and shamed, started crying when her mother insulted and rebuked her. After this, her son Cyril Pearson entered hurriedly and asked his mother hurriedly if it's tea ready, on which Mrs. Pearson refused and advised him to prepare it himself. After seeing her mother's reaction and her sister crying, after seeing his mother's reaction and his sister crying, he raises his voice, also calls Mrs. Fitzgerald an old hag, on which Mrs. Pearson instructed him to mind his language. Then the kids talk about being born out after work. She made it very clear to both of them they all will work equally from that day onwards. She will not work at weekends and enjoy with her friends. At that point, Mr. Pearson, George Pearson, entered the house, expressed his surprise. On seeing his wife drinking and smoking, he objected Mrs. Pearson, made him realize that if he can drink, then she can too. Further, he tells him that instead of spending his time with her wife, he is spending time with people who are making fun of him behind his back. Mrs. Pearson, on seeing her family insult, asked Mrs. Fitzgerald to stop all this. However, she doesn't let her speak until she teaches all of them a good lesson of respecting and honoring their mother. Soon after, they trace personality again. After that, the son, daughter, husband learned their lesson, start supporting their mother and wife. Through the Mother's Day, the writer wants to say that we all should respect, care and help our mother for all the hardships she does for us. A mother has been expected to contribute her whole life to her family. Mother is someone who holds a family together because it is up to her to provide the loving care, attention, support needed. She is a good listener, problem solver, guide, as well as being always available for her children. Unfortunately, so many times mother's love is not reciprocated the way it should have been. Some children don't recognize the importance of what their mother is doing for them. They don't take into account the sacrifices she makes so that her children could be reared in the best possible way. Today's women shoulder all the responsibilities at home as well as outside as she is educated, responsible, can take independent decisions, but still the subject of empowerment of women is burning issue all over the world, including India. So inequalities between men and women, discrimination against women have been age-old issue. Women are still exploited as men refuse to accept the rising status of women. The play very humorously, sarcastically, interestingly depicts the status of mother in a family. Through the character of Mrs. Annie Pearson, the play very subtly depicts the plight of women, especially the housewives. Playing of magic, exchange of personalities, shocked behavior of Mrs. Annie Pearson's family members are all humorous as well as satirical. The main characters are Mrs. Pearson, Mrs. Pearson, Annie Pearson. She was very timid, a typical wife, typical mother. She was herself responsible for her own fate. She was very soft, loving, caring. Unfortunately, her husband never acknowledged her role, failed to understand her words. She wanted to correct them but could not do so due to fear of hurting their feelings. So, in Annie's family, Mrs. Annie Pearson, her husband George Pearson, Doris Pearson, her daughter, and Cyril Pearson, they are self-centered, self-focused, selfish, take Annie Pearson for granted, whereas she takes care of all their needs. Their behavior but she wants her presence work to be acknowledged by all family members. Mrs. Fitzgerald, she was just opposite of Mrs. Annie Pearson. She was a bit older, heavier, strong, confident, and dominating personality. She was not nervous like Annie Pearson, has a very strong personality. She knows how to straighten things out, even if it means to go to extremes. She drinks, smokes, and gets angry when Annie's family members talk to her. She knew the art of magic. She wanted Mrs. Annie Pearson to let her set the members of her family. So, with the help of magic, she exchanged their personalities. For this, she held Annie's hand, spoke the magic words to interchange their personalities. Moment this happened, all the qualities of Mrs. Fitzgerald entered in Annie's personality. And next character is Doris Pearson. Doris is Annie's spoiled daughter. She was a pretty girl in her early 20s. She made her mother run after her all the time. She expected her mother to do all tasks that she asked her to do without questioning her. She thinks nothing of her mother and only wants to have a nice time with her boyfriend Charlie son. And next, the character Cyril Pearson. Cyril is the son of Annie Pearson. He treats his mother with indifference. He wanted that whatever he commanded his mother to do must be done with utmost urgency. He lacked any concern for his mother, tried to show that he is a busy man by working 8 hours a day. And next, George Pearson. George is Annie's husband. He thinks too much of himself, makes his wife do whatever he commands. That's why he told her that he didn't expect her to drink strong beer at that time of evening. She should follow his instructions to stop drinking. George has dominated over his wife so far, so he did not expect this changed behavior from her. Their attitude, male ego, suffered joy when George entered into home and comes to know that his wife has not kept tea ready for him. Whether he needs it or not, she should have kept his tea ready like an obedient servant. He is always in the club at night and spends little time with his wife. After exchanging her personality with Mrs. Fitzgerald, Annie then ridicules him that he has become a standing joke for the people of the club. So, in the end, with the help of Mrs. Fitzgerald, she was successful in setting her spoiled children. So the play raises real issues. The problem it raises are genuine. Millions of women have to lead such a miserable life as Mrs. Pearson is forced to lead. Their husbands, children care only for themselves. Their interest, entertainment, likes, dislikes, they don't bother. The play also resolves the issues. Women can set their spoiled children arrogant husbands by asserting themselves. Self-denial will lead them nowhere. They must change the dominating behavior of their husbands and children. Only by refusing more than they do, they can find some time for leisure, fun and rest. There is no scope of showing any disagreement with the resolution of the issues as mentioned in this play. I hope you can understand well. Thank you for watching it. Keep watching each and every part of the video. Any confusion can ask me. Thank you once again.